This is a Fox News alert on a high-stakes election going on right now in Georgia. It's the race between Democrat Jon Ossoff and Republican Karen Handel in the most expensive House campaign in history. And Washington is watching. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kennedy, and here today, the co-host of After the Bell on the Fox Business Network, Melissa Francis. Chief legal correspondent Shannon Bream is here, as well as FBN anchor of The Intelligence Report, Trish Regan, and of course today's hashtag one lucky guy, the luckiest. He's a former Trump Transition Executive Committee member and the founder of Skybridge Capital. It's Anthony Scaramucci, and he is outnumbered. Mooch.
Great to be here, guys.
Yeah, you don't seem too disturbed to be the man in the middle.
Who's going to win the election?
Today?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about that right now, Anthony. I'm glad you asked because it is the closely watched special election, and it's between Jon Ossoff and Karen Handel. It's now in the voters' hands. The latest polls show them locked in a dead heat to replace Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. Both parties are watching for clues about the shape of the 2018 midterms. President Trump has been a very active player in the race, tweeting this morning, quote, Karen Handel for Congress. She will fight for lower taxes, great health care, strong security, a hard worker who will never give up, vote today. And, quote, Democrat Jon Ossoff, who wants to raise your taxes to the highest level and is weak on crime and security, doesn't even live in district. All right, let's go to Jonathan Serra. He's live at a polling station in Atlanta. Jonathan.
Hi, Kennedy. Well, campaign spending in this race is topping $50 million, and that's because both parties are looking at this as a must-win election. Now, if Democrat Jon Ossoff can win this district, which normally favors establishment Republicans, it will serve as a blueprint for his party's efforts to retake Congress during the 2018 midterms. If Karen Handel wins, then Republicans will feel a little safer because many will view the outcome as a referendum on President Trump and the GOP in general.
I believe in Donald J. Trump. I was just with him in Washington, D.C. And I believe in making America great again. I believe that Karen Handel will help us.
Some people want to make it a referendum about Trump, but for me it's more about making it about the future. I think what's going on in our country, and I think that I'm looking, myself personally, I'm looking for fresh leadership.
The record campaign flooding has flooded the airwaves with political ads. Ossoff has been positioning himself as a moderate, willing to work with both parties to cut government waste.
He stayed focused on the issues in the 6th District, and more importantly, he went away from the theme of holding Trump accountable because he had to go after those disaffected Republicans in the district who still support Donald Trump.
My opponent doesn't live here, doesn't share our values. He's raised millions outside of Georgia from Nancy Pelosi and outsiders who just don't share our priorities.
And Karen Handel's ads have been trying to link her opponent to the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party. Now, as this high-profile race plays out here in Georgia, a much less expensive, lower-profile race is taking place in the 5th congressional district in South Carolina. This is a race to fill the seat of former Congressman Mick Mulvaney, who joined the Trump administration as his budget director. Kennedy, back to you.
All right, that's right. There are 2 races underway, but it is the one in Georgia. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Anthony, I will turn to you because it is this Georgia race that has the nation transfixed right now, as though this may be the bellwether. Democrats are hoping that it's a tipping point and it sends a big message to donors and their party that they're going to make big gains in 2018. What does the race say to you?
Well, listen, it's tighter than I would like to see it. I do think that Handel's going to win, and I do love the president's tweeting because you can tell when he's copywriting his own tweets just by the way he says certain things, like higher taxes to the upper level and these sorts of things. And so I think that this is not going to be the playbook for the future, by the way, because you're not going to be spending $50 million on these sorts of races in 2018. I just don't think that's going to happen. And so, yes, it's a litmus test in some ways, but I do believe that she will win. Yeah. And then it'll go back to the status quo in that area. And so I don't think it's that big of a deal.
But it should be a more comfortable margin for her, Melissa. I mean, this is a traditionally Republican district.
I agree with that.
Mitt Romney won by 24 points back in 2012. the president, not a traditional Republican, had a harder time. And, you know, there are a lot of these races, some of these special elections across the country that have been tighter than Republicans want. Yeah. What is going to be the tipping point here?
Well, they'll make the point that he didn't campaign there, and, you know, that's why it wasn't a huge victory for him. At the same time, to see somebody come in, I mean, what an interesting opponent from the Democrat side. He's so young. He really defines carpetbagger. I mean, he can't actually vote for himself because he doesn't live there. And I think that's so interesting. At the same time, it's amazing that it had to go to a runoff, that it's that close. And I would argue that's kind of the country we're in right now. And I also have now, I throw away the polls when you're looking at ahead of time how it's going to go. It's amazing that that's become totally unreliable as well. Yeah. But I do think it does say a lot about the mood of the country, as much as we heard people in that piece trying to say that it wasn't about Trump and it wasn't about the president, it wasn't about this, that, and the other thing. No, it is. It is. We're like almost perfectly divided right now.
All right. So how much of an impact will it have on the Republican Party if Karen Handel wins?
Well, if she wins, I think everybody will go home and sleep well, and they'll feel pretty good because it will be basically, you know, proof that Donald Trump still has a base that's following him. Donald Trump still has a base that cares. If she doesn't, it's a whole other game. I think it's going to be a massive wake-up call for all Republicans to say, listen, we need to get on board. We need to come together because the only way to fight the Dems is to actually do this with some unity. I don't think it's going to come to that. I actually think when push comes to shove, you're going to see a lot of people come out for her. I mean, you consider the tragedy that just happened with Steve Scalise.
Yeah, that's one of my questions. Is that a galvanizing factor? Because there was an outside group who used the shooting in a campaign ad.
I know, you hate to see that, right? I mean, you do hate to see them playing the politics of all that. But I think that there are a lot of people in this country right now that feel if they are a conservative, their back is up against the wall. And this election, they're using that basically as a proxy. In other words, you've got to go out and vote for Handel if you want the Republican Party to thrive, for Donald Trump to still have a voice. So push comes to shove, I think she gets it. But you're right, Anthony, they shouldn't be in this point to begin with.
Jana?
Well, I think there are a couple things to watch for him. First of all, the fact is that Democrats in these special elections have been outpacing what Hillary Clinton did in that particular district. Now, we know that the president won this district by less than 2 points.
Okay, now, I just want to ask you something really quickly about that, because that's true, and in a lot of these races, a lot of these Democrats have been outperforming her, and I don't know if it's so much about an anti-Trump movement or the strength of these candidates as it is about her being such a weak candidate, anyone else would have done better.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely part of it. But the fact is, too, we're seeing a lot of early voting and first-time voters registering, which I think is a big boon to him. You don't see a lot of conservative 65-year-olds going out to register to vote early for the very first time in their lives. So that would seem to bode well for him as well. But you think about what she's been through, how long this district has been held by Republicans since 1979. It's generally reliably red. I think it's going to be all about turnout. Those early vote numbers are very high. Yeah. But think about all the outside money that's poured in, $26 million from groups outside the state of Georgia.
Well, the other thing I don't like about the race is that he is using the president's playbook. He's coming in as an outsider. He's galvanizing a group of people that feel that they're disaffected, and he's creating a little bit of a movement down there, and she is a weak candidate. And so there's a lot of similarities.
Do you think he's that strong? I mean, the 30-year-old filmmaker?
I don't think he's that strong, but it's a combination of her weakness and his insurgency and his freshness that's making the race so close. Again, I think he's going to lose the race, but I think it's interesting that he's adopted as a Democrat many of the elements of the president's successful campaign strategy last fall.
Okay, but here's the thing about him. I don't know if he's the Messiah. I don't think he's the great savior of the party. I don't think he's a particularly politically interesting person. And if he were, if he had a deep well of ideas that voters there could resonate with, he would have won the election in the first place. He was 2 percentage points away from winning the seat outright with that 50% threshold.
I agree with all those things, and I'm not a Democratic strategist, but let me tell you, though, it's an interesting playbook. Their next presidential nominee will likely have a footprint that's similar. An outsider, maybe it could be a Howard Schultz, maybe it could be a Bob Iger. It'll be an outsider with a fresher message.
I don't know if Bob Iger, though, or Howard Schultz. Well, I mean, you're talking about the CEO of Disney.
Okay, but what does it say to the Democratic Party if
I don't think it'll be the traditional politician. That's
if Ossoff wins, and he's run on a moderate, still anti-Trump platform, what does that say to the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party? Do they have to lop off that part of the playbook?
I don't know if they have to lop it off, but it would definitely send a strong signal, because here you see somebody who's pushing this idea. They're young, they're fresh, they're moderate. I mean, we've had that whole discourse going between, and this always is what happens when a party loses power. Do you go to the extreme side? Do you go towards the center? He feels like, at least from what he's saying and how he's playing the campaign, I know people take issue with his issues to say that he's really like this, but he comes across as moderate. I mean, he talked about that. I can work with people from both sides of the aisle. He's also so young. I mean, he's going to bring in some new faces as well. So I don't know. I mean, I would think not that he's the one that would go forward, but he may be that mold that people try to cast themselves in afterwards, even if he loses. I mean, if it's very close, they may be like, this is something that
can work. that something
idea
here resonated, and perhaps they will replicate that in future races. Well, of course, you see 4 naughty substitute teachers on the couch, and that is because our beloved Harris Faulkner, Sandra Smith, and Meghan McCain are all in Vegas
without us
on assignment.
What? How did that happen?
Why did they go without us? What's up with that?
I guess the party plane wasn't big enough, but the couch is for all of our coverage, our issues, and our adoration. All right, and the coverage, of course, doesn't stop here. We're going to be following the Georgia special election and the race in South Carolina. Remember, 2 of them going on today. It's happening all day and into the night as we get closer to the final tallies. Brett Baer will host a late edition of Special Report at 11 p.m. Eastern. That's right here on the Fox News Channel. Now, Republicans are pushing hard for a vote on health care before the July 4th recess, but Dems are trying hard to gum up the works, whether the GOP will get it done and what to expect if they do. Plus, the American college student held prisoner in North Korea for 17 months is dead less than a week after he was returned home. And now lawmakers are calling for accountability. What President Trump should do. We'll discuss it on the couch. Outnumbered continues.
Well, the battle over health care is intensifying. Senate Republicans reportedly planning to vote on a repeal of Obamacare next week. That's according to Politico, which also reports lawmakers are expected to see the text of the bill by the end of this week. Meantime, Democrats went to the floor last night, holding on to protest the GOP's closed-door negotiations. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell went at it over how much time lawmakers are actually going to have to review the bill.
Will it be available to us and the public more than 10 hours before we have to vote for it?
I think
since our leader has said, our Republican leader, that there'll be plenty of time for a process where people can make amendments. You need time to prepare those amendments.
I think we'll have ample opportunity to read and amend the bill.
Will it be more than 10 hours?
I think we'll have ample opportunity to read and amend the bill.
I rest my case.
McConnell later adding that no matter what's in the bill, Democrats are not going to give it a chance.
This subject has been very partisan from the beginning. Not a single Republican voted for the bill, and our friends on the other side have made it perfectly clear no Democrats will be voting to replace it.
All right, with that in mind, the Republicans actually need to keep together their coalition, and that's going to be a heavy lift in the Senate. Melissa, we know that there are all kinds of things that they're still fighting over. Medicaid, Planned Parenthood funding, all kinds of things. They've got to stay to 50, so they have that tiebreaker with the vice president if they need it. Can they?
That's why I think in terms of their own strategy, this is a really smart way to do it. They're behind closed doors. It sounds like they've tried to include a lot of different factions at the table as much as possible to kind of get it out of the way quiet. I mean, the more you hear the Democrats complain, the more effective you know this strategy is. They seem like they're locked in, they're working on it hard, they're trying to get together something so that they can walk out and get it across. You know, I mean, it's up to the people in the room if they can really get that done, but in terms of a strategy, this does seem to be the best one, don't you think? Where am I going wrong?
Look, I love the strategy, but the strategy will only work as if they hold their coalition together.
Right.
I think one of the big challenges that I have had, and I'm a fellow Republican, is that for some reason we allow our petite ideological differences to get in the way and cause a civil war within the community. And so it is in the best interest of the president and the best interest of the country to get this bill passed. So I'm hoping that this strategy will work.
Well, but Trish, with that in mind, them trying to keep it together in the Senate, we now have this letter from the Republican Study Committee, which is conservatives over in the House, and they're saying, like, whoa, 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 what we're hearing that you're negotiating in the Senate, yeah, that's endangering whether we're going to vote for it. We know how cobbled together the votes were in the House, and now those guys are saying if you do these 4 or 5 things, we can't vote for it in the House.
So what a mess, right? I mean, Americans sent Republicans there because they wanted repeal and replace. So they've got to deliver on repeal and replace, or you know what? I'll tell you, they're going to be in trouble in the midterms. I mean, that's the reality of this situation.
I agree with that.
So the Senate,
I hope they're listening.
the Senate's trying to do what it can do. And look, none of this is perfect. The Democrats, though, have made it very clear. They're not going to vote for this. It doesn't matter what you give them. So in some ways, they've taken themselves out of the equation. Chuck Schumer can ask for all the hours he wants. He and fellow Dems have taken themselves out of the equation. They are no longer at the bargaining table. But they got to get something through.
And they need it repaired and replaced or repealed and replaced the Democrats. So they actually know that it's failing in its current configuration.
Well, let's play an ad. This is going to be out there for Republicans who are under pressure in the Senate. And this is how the choice is spelled out.
Senator Heller, when this happens, she isn't thinking about the health care bill in Congress. She isn't thinking that it'll force her to choose between filling his prescriptions or paying their mortgage. She isn't thinking that when her premiums go up, they'll lose their health insurance.
Kitty, I almost don't know where to start. There's so much stuff there to break down. The fact that having coverage is not the same as having care is one thing, but there's a lot of emotion.
No, absolutely. I mean, they're totally emotionalizing an issue with so much hysteria. And it's interesting because I watched that, and, you know, I don't think the only solution is either she pays for his medicine or she pays the mortgage. And, you know, if she chooses to pay the mortgage, you know, sorry, son, wish you were born with a better set of lungs. But I also think, you know, maybe if we had less FDA regulation, that we'd have more free market choices to contend with, and she'd have a better array of drugs to choose from in the first place.
Yeah, but she's hitting on the inhaler issue. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you want to try and make the inhaler issue into a health care issue, that was the whole fight we got
with
in over.
EpiPen.
It was the idea.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like EpiPen. When you go in and you get the replacements and things are outlawed, I don't know, a lot of people in my family use inhalers. Yeah. We're always switching around. They're always changing what is legal, what is covered by your insurance. Well, I mean, maybe that's more about regulation.
And the problem with FDA, it absolutely is. There weren't enough choices on the market, but it also goes to show you, with this kind of infighting, not only among Democrats and Republicans, but the ideological differences within the Republican Party, it just shows an issue like this is so emotional and is so important to people, but it also shows the failure of government, and we need more free market solutions in healthcare.
And sadly, we couldn't solve it in 5 minutes. So we're going to stay on this, but we're also awaiting remarks now from another topic. This is going to be House Speaker Paul Ryan on tax reform. They're going to get that done, too. Both he and the president say their agenda is on track. So is it? And voters heading to the polls in a high-stakes special election in Georgia. We are watching this race closely between Jon Ossoff and Karen Handel. What it could tell us about the 2018 midterms.
News alert for you now. We are awaiting House Speaker Paul Ryan preparing to take on a hot-button issue. Ryan said to address a group of manufacturers in Washington in what his office is calling a major speech on tax reform. The House Speaker will reportedly be pushing lawmakers to overhaul the tax code by the end of the year, fingers crossed, despite political divisions that have delayed much of President Trump's agenda. A discussion on that is straight ahead. In the meantime, growing calls to hold North Korea accountable for the death of an American college student. Otto Warmbier died yesterday, just days after he was returned home unresponsive, following 17 months in a North Korean prison. Warmbier was sentenced to 15 years hard labor for allegedly stealing a propaganda poster, and now President Trump is weighing in on his death, saying what happened was a disgrace. Listen.
It's a total disgrace what happened to Otto. That should never, ever be allowed to happen. And frankly, if he were brought home sooner, I think the result would have been a lot different. I spoke with his family. His family is incredible, what they've gone through. But he should have been brought home a long time ago.
And those comments come after the president called North Korea a, quote, brutal regime and vowed to handle Pyongyang. All this as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Ben Cardin, joined several other lawmakers urging a strong U.S. response, saying, quote, Otto is dead because of Kim Jong-un's repressive, murderous regime. North Korea must be held accountable for their continued barbaric behavior. In the meantime, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says North Korea is to blame for Warmbier's unjust imprisonment and is demanding the return of 3 other Americans who are still being held there. Kennedy, I think that's the salient point. I mean, we went through this period. A lot of people said that they didn't remember he was being held. His name was kept out of the press, and we haven't talked much about these other 3. Yeah. That was the policy of the last administration, stay quiet. Obviously, that didn't work. Now what?
Strategic patience has been deadly, and the family, unfortunately, is feeling that. It has long been the assumption that Americans were taken pretty well care of in North Korea because they were used as political bargaining chips, and we see obviously that that is not the case. So, you know, we need not only proof of life of those Americans, we need proof of health. Right. And it is very understandable, the anger and the sense of injustice, that it doesn't matter what party you're in. This is an American. This is a kid. And no one deserves the treatment that he has undergone. God rest his soul. And I absolutely agree with Senator McCain when he says that he was murdered.
Yeah. Anthony, General Jack Keane saying earlier today that this is going to come to very strong action, that the U.S. must stand very strong on this issue. What do you think?
Well, what I like about the president is he's been very measured. Every time there's a crisis like this, he's very, very measured. He doesn't like tipping his hand. But I think there's lessons in history from this, Melissa, is that any time that you appease a repressive, autocratic regime, you get results that you're not looking for. And so if we don't take countermeasures now, something worse will happen in the future. And that is something that we learn from history. Just think about all these regimes that people tried to use strategic patience, or in the case of the Obama administration, unstrategic indifference is leading to this sort of problem.
Trish, the quote I was looking for was, it will strengthen our resolve that we really have to do something once and for all about this regime. That could be one good thing that comes from his death. That's what the general said.
You wonder what that means, right, Melissa? I mean, what do we do here? Because I'll tell you, we play by one set of rules, and the rest of the world plays by another. And it puts us very much at a disadvantage because we actually do the right thing. It's not like we're going to take someone from North Korea and do anything like this, yet they'll do that to our people, and we have 3 Americans there now. So how do we confront this threat? I had a guest on the show just yesterday who was saying we need to go back, it's tit for tat, but we don't do that. So what are the options here? More sanctions? Get China's help, Shannon?
Yeah, I think obviously China is a player here. That is without a doubt. And the interesting thing, too, is we have this new president in South Korea, newly elected, who seems to want to engage more with North Korea, doesn't want the anti-defense missile system that we were going to put in there. So it feels like a little bit of maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step back with this new election in South Korea. But pressure's got to be brought onto China. I mean, they're the key player for this whole thing.
Kennedy, Ambassador Bolton also was saying earlier today, we don't want to be faced with a situation where we're looking at a missile sitting on the tarmac. We don't know what it's loaded with, what it could possibly do, or where it's headed. At that point, it's really too late.
Yeah, and you know, we have to be careful to separate these issues. And, you know, we have to separate the fact that this is a nuclear power, whether we like it or not. And this is a nuclear power that has grown much more aggressive and unemotional and cold in what they're willing to do. And it just goes to show you, you know, rhetoric is one thing, but this death is proof that they have no value for human life at all whatsoever. And having said that, you know, there is no easy solution. You know, it's a wonderful thing to say, well, we should go in and we should get all those Americans, but we have to take into account that, you know, they've got nukes and they're doing whatever they can to develop the technology or buy it from Pakistan or whoever else will sell it to them to get those nukes to us.
I think that's why you don't separate the issue, though. They've shown what they're willing to do with human beings and how much they don't care about human life. So having nuclear weapons in the hands of someone like that makes it so much more terrifying.
All right, well, we will certainly be continuing this discussion all day, and we are awaiting House Speaker Paul Ryan for what his office is calling a major speech on tax reform before the National Association of Manufacturers. The Speaker promising to overhaul the tax code by the end of this year. This is both Ryan and President Trump insisting in recent days that their agenda is very much on track, including on taxes and health care. Ryan earlier today calling our current tax system crazy, saying it pushes companies to keep profits overseas instead of bringing them home. Watch.
Over $3 trillion of U.S. money parked overseas that should come back into the U.S. economy, but it can't because of our tax code. So we want to clean up the tax code, and we really believe tax reform getting our rates down so they're competitive globally is the key to faster economic growth. What our goal here is higher take-home pay, more jobs, faster economic growth. You can't get that without tax reform.
All right, and he will make that push a little bit later. Meantime, the Dow and the S&P 500 hitting new all-time highs again yesterday as the stock market surge since President Trump's election continues. So, Anthony, what does Speaker Ryan have to say in his remarks to make the pitch to the American people that tax reform is the best way, both personally for individuals and for businesses, to get this economy further growing?
Well, I think he does a very effective job in terms of letting people know that at the end of the day, corporate profits, it's not a inanimate object. It's actually people that are paying those taxes. And so I think the first thing they're going to do is explain the reduction in corporate profit in terms of corporate taxes will lead to higher jobs and better wages. So I think he'll do a very good job of that. The secondary piece of this thing, which I think is super important, we have 75,000 pages of code that have been layered on since 1986. Yeah. And I think the Speaker does a very good job of explaining just by simplifying that. And whatever the revenue characteristics are, just a simplification will lead to better understanding, better accountability, better revenues in the system, and a cleaner system. And so, listen, we're a generation plus 6 years away from the last reform. It's got to be reformed now.
You're absolutely right. And Paul Ryan has called this transformational tax reform, that this is going to be once in a generation.
The president wants it.
Yeah, and how can he make this happen, having so many wobbles on health care?
Well, let's be optimistic for a moment. Let's say that we dress up the health care thing and we get that voted on and passed, and then that gives him the ammo necessary to get the tax reform. And I'll make a very bold prediction here. There will be some Democrats that vote on the tax reform, because even President Obama said before he left office that the highest corporate tax rates in the industrialized world, which is the United States, is unsustainable for the American economy. So I predict we get the health care resolved and you get some Democrats crossing the aisle to reform the tax code.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing to me because they talk about companies and how they pay their taxes and where their profits are like they're bad actors. Companies are you. It's everybody out there who has shares in their pension funds and everything else. Money goes where it's treated best. When you tax the heck out of it here, it stays away and creates jobs in other places. Yeah. To me, this isn't even a partisan issue. I mean, who's a better steward of your money? You or people far away in Washington where there's just waste, fraud, and abuse everywhere you look, right?
No, you're absolutely right. You're preaching to the choir on this one, Melissa. You and I are on the same page, absolutely. We want the ability to control that money ourselves. You earn it, you should control it. And you know what? The same goes for corporations. And I do think that you can get some bipartisanship on this. This is one opportunity where you have that in Washington. Democrats and Republicans agree. We are taxing our corporations to death. Yeah. And as such, we are becoming increasingly less competitive. That's not what we want.
You're disincentivizing.
Right. Why should a company want to start overseas in Ireland instead of right here in the United States of America? Because of tax policy, we need to fix that. We need to fix it fast. And I think they can.
Yeah, the need is there.
Listen, the last time they did bipartisan reform in 1986, it was bipartisan. And it is something that both parties can agree that needs to happen. So we'll see if it does this time around.
All right. We will see indeed. What about that Sean Spicer? Spicy. He's taken on a new role at the White House. We are told it's a promotion, but it's coming amid renewed tension with reporters who are upset about fewer on-camera press briefings, whether they have a point or are briefings not the best way for the president to get his message out. Plus, we are watching the special election in Georgia. Voters heading to the polls in the race that could tell us a lot about what to expect in the 2018 midterm. So much happening, and the only place to be a part of it is right here on the Curvy Couch. More Outnumbered in moments.
All right, we are awaiting an on-camera White House press briefing in less than an hour from Press Secretary Sean Spicer. This, as we're learning, Spicer will be taking on a new role overseeing the president's entire communications operation, giving up some of his day-to-day duties at the podium. Now, while Spicer's new title is still being decided, the White House is calling it a promotion. But this comes with tension growing among reporters who are just not so happy about the administration's fewer press briefings that they've been holding in recent weeks. CNN's Jim Acosta blasting the White House just yesterday. Watch him.
The White House press secretary is getting to a point, Brooke, where he's just kind of useless. You know, if he can't come out and answer the questions and they're just not going to do this on camera or audio, why are we even having these briefings or these gaggles in the first place? That's the White House behind me. The White House. And it's just, it's bizarre. I don't know what world we're living in right now, Brooke. We're standing at the White House and they bring us into the briefing room here at the White House and they won't answer these questions on camera or let us record the audio.
Was he at the White House? I think he was at the White House. Was that the White House?
He's throwing a tantrum.
These substitute teachers are brutal now.
He's pretty,
no mercy.
pretty upset.
Wrap your knuckles,
Anthony.
Indeed. But, you know, Washington Post reporter says the president and his supporters see the press corps as hostile to him during those briefings. So that's one of the reasons they want to back off. Watch.
It isn't just Trump. It extends to all of his supporters, too. His supporters believe that the press briefing has become a medium by which the media persecutes the president.
Okay, so the question is, do we really need these pressers at all? I mean, why not do it off camera? Why not just write down the answers in old-fashioned style, like a real reporter? Ask a question, write down the answer. Do you really need to have it
Because this is the year 2017, and people are used to visual communication.
Well, Jim Acosta likes
more
his
than
fights,
ever.
right?
Well, yeah, Jim Acosta needs to eat a ham sandwich because it looks like his sugar was a little bit low. You know, people like that need to get a grip on themselves, and unfortunately, we've lost all sense of reality and rationalism. Yes, we do need to hold the White House accountable, regardless of who the occupant is. But also, the press needs to be at least somewhat objective.
See, I watch these, Melissa, at 2 o'clock, and I'm like, what are we getting out of this right now?
Entertainment.
Yes, entertainment, but...
Ratings?
You know, as a nation,
I mean,
aside from the TV thing, is it worth it for the administration to be doing that?
I'm not even making a joke. I mean, the ratings, I mean, I think this is why the press corps wants them all the time. They know it's fodder for the whole rest of the day and for SNL and everything else. I mean, they want the content. It has nothing to do with trying to serve the public as they could. Maybe some. Okay, I shouldn't blanket everyone with that. But it mostly has to do with, we were talking about this, you get addicted to the content for everything that they're working on, even though they claim they're not getting the answer to their question, but they want it back, but they say no one's telling them, you know, when they're sitting there giving them any information. I understand it is without question the responsibility of the press secretary.
But Anthony, you know all of these people.
I would say a couple things. First of all, as a fellow Italian, Acosta should be eating cannolis, not ham sandwiches.
Yum.
Secondarily, I do believe that we should keep the time-honored tradition of having the press briefing. I do think that if Sean is taking a different role, appears that he is, that maybe they'll change the strategy around the briefing. And I think there are ways to make that briefing a little less hostile, and there are ways to restyle the way the questions are being answered in a briefing like that. That will put those reporters on their heels a little bit, and I think that will happen. I don't know who the person will be behind the podium, but my guess is that style.
Dana Brito said the same thing. Yeah,
it seems like it's very antagonistic. His relationship with the reporters, and they ask him a question, he sometimes gets a little bit flustered, and it turns into something as opposed to, say, the smooth sailing we saw recently from Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
And that's the thing. Years ago, we didn't used to have these daily briefings. I mean, over the course of this country, they're definitely a newer development that we have. And so, yes, the press wants them. They want to have them every day. And as you said, Melissa, it's material for the rest of the day because it doesn't even matter if they get the answer they want.
No, it's better if they don't.
Right, because then they have the back and forth where they're in the shot, Spicer's in the shot, they're back and forth, they're pushing. Look at how we needle him. Look how he won't give us an answer. I mean, that is material for them, aside from any kind of real content.
And if they don't get an answer from Sean Spicer, they can just use an anonymous source, right?
Right, there's that too.
Convenient.
When I say material, I mean, I want to qualify this because we're saying, you know, they want material. Of course, they're going to say, yes, we want the truth. We want answers. We want what's out there. And I think that's disingenuous. I mean, they are looking for the fight in a lot of cases because it does make more interesting television.
The mainstream media is hostile to the president.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he needs this as a counter-communication strategy to the mainstream media. Just another reason why I'd like to see these daily press briefings continue.
Yeah, and by the way, there was a recent poll that showed exactly that. Americans realize that. They realize that there is hostility, absolutely, right now. All right, college students and their aversion to different opinions. That issue making it all the way to Capitol Hill today, a hearing on free speech on campuses and why it seems to be in danger. What to do about those snowflakes who melt at the mere mention of a conservative idea? We're going to debate it. See you right back here after this.